Okay, great. So good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for joining our session on multi-country replications as part of the JRP conference. I'm very happy to have four great speakers here with intense experience in the area. And before we start, I just wanted to give you a quick overview or like a quick introduction on why we are doing this and how we're doing this. And I just realized I forgot something that I always forget, which is to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Janis. I'm the Director of Operations of the JRP. And yeah, as most of you know, as part of the JRP, there is an internship. And for the past 3 years now, we have been remodeling this in a way that will bring together the junior researchers under Kai's supervision together with, I would say more senior junior researchers to conduct a large-scale replication across multiple countries. All of this started with a replication of prospect theory, which went really well and got a lot of attention. And when I was talking to our scientific affairs office, we were thinking of organizing a panel for the Congress, and we were talking about, okay, so what is there? There are a lot of great, big, important topics at the moment in psychology and in behavioral science, especially relating to open science, relating to replication. And then we thought, well, there's one thing that apparently nobody has ever really brought together in this way, which is just like our sort of consortium of young researchers coming together and doing replications on a large scale. There are, of course, many others who have done this, and some of them also have their own guidelines and put together what they've learned from their large scale replications. But what nobody had really done was to put people from different consortia, they're not even consortia all the time. They're often a loose group of people, researchers coming together, really trying to work on an important topic, and to see, okay, how did other people do it? What worked well, what didn't work so well? So the idea is really to today ask a few questions into the methodology and the approaches, and see how different groups try to do it. And then hopefully we would try to get to write this up in some sort of paper to really give others who would like to do replications across multiple countries a bit of an insight of what different approaches there are. So the idea today is not to say, okay, this approach is the best, this approach is not the best, but it's really to see what are the different options, especially for people in different situations, and which aspects worked well and which ones had problems, and how did people overcome these problems, so that in the future people could look at the insights that we're bringing together today. So in this session and the second session this afternoon that Jarke will moderate, to sort of pick and choose their own approach. So for this discussion, I'm really happy that today we have Bojana Većkalov from the University of Amsterdam, Gilad Feldman from the University of Hong Kong, Lana Bojanić from the University of Manchester, and Janis Zickfeld from Aarhus University. To start things off, I would like to give you, not to read your bio myself, which I always think is a very weird thing to start things. So I would like to give you a short or a bit of time to just do a roundtable, introduce yourself, give us a quick personal background on yourself, the topic of the multi-country replication or replications that you have worked on, or even just a brief research question, and then what personal role you had in the study. And if you know it from the top of your head, it would also be interesting to know how many people were participating as collaborators, how many countries you had included. I know those were a lot of, bullet points within this. So if you forget any of these, please just, while you're introducing yourself, feel free to ask. And I would like to give the floor to Bojana, maybe. Do you want to start off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Janis. So hi, everyone. My name is Bojana Većkalov, as Janis said, and I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Amsterdam, where I'm looking into science skepticism and ways we can reduce science skepticism. And in terms of my involvement with replications, I've been a part of the JRP for the past 3 years, I think. So I've participated in all 3 replications, large-scale multi-country replications we've done so far. In the first one as sort of the student intern, and then in the second one, I had sort of a bigger role, sort of trying to assist in coordinating the teams and also designing the initial aspects of the study. So that is the replication I'll be focusing on the most. The title is the general fault in our fault line. So we were trying to see if the findings on group meta perceptions are that were obtained in the US are generalizable across multiple countries, and what that basically means without going into too many details. So group meta perceptions refer to so what do example, I don't know, the Dutch, what do they think, how do they think the Belgians see them, basically? Those are group meta perceptions, and we focused on like the political context and policy decisions. So yeah, it was quite a challenge to adapt the materials sometimes because it was highly context dependent. And I wrote down here we had I think 84 collaborators from 26 countries, and yeah, that's basically it. Did I forget anything, Janis?
No, I think that covers everything pretty well.
Okay, good.
And in this case, since Lana, since you have been involved in the same studies, I would hand it over to you next.
That's all right, thank you. And thank you for explaining our topic so well, Bojana, so I don't have to. So hi, everybody, I'm Lana from University of Manchester, where I work as a research assistant, and I'm also a PhD student part-time. There, my topic of research is suicide prevention. So I have been involved with JRP for way too many years now. I think we're approaching 8 or something like that. And so throughout my role as director of open science, I have been involved together with Bojana and Kai in the design, collaborator coordination mostly, and I have also been collecting data for my country as well. So basically, Bojana explained the topic, gave the number of collaborators, 26 countries, yes, mostly throughout Europe, which is something I think we're going to talk more about later, representation, weird countries, not weird countries, and so on. But yeah, basically that would be it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lana. And also Janis and Gilad, if they're, because I realized that, you know, as this is a JRP event, many people are very knowledgeable about our project. So if they're at any point would like to ask a question because we might skip something just because we think everybody else knows it, please feel free to chime in as well. But then Gilad, do you want to continue maybe?
Sure, thank you. Very happy to learn about JRP, and I was not familiar with this before, and I think it's very important for me to know about this because in our project, we really aim to work with early career researchers. The entire prospect of our project is to mass mobilize as much as possible, beginning from students as early as second year undergraduate, all the way up to, you know, early career researchers, so through MPhil, PhD, postdoc, and my kind of level, early stage of assistant professor. So it all started, I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Hong Kong. My journey with open science started at Maastricht University in the Netherlands, where I did my postdoc. And I think in 2016-17, it became very clear that things are happening in science. The first mass replication projects came out, and findings were disappointing. So the question for me as an early career researcher in my postdoc, having gone for a PhD, was what should I do with this knowledge? So before doing anything and continuing all the projects that I did before, I decided to pause everything and concentrate on trying to make sense of what's happening. Of all the domains that I was faced with, I was a social psychologist, so this is kind of like my general domain, but I really thought that kind of prospect theory or judgment and decision making seemed to be the most solid of the things that I had a chance to work with. So I decided I'm going to start from the domain of judgment decision making. I'm going to start doing as many pre-registered replications and pre-registered meta-analysis as I can in order to map out what works and what doesn't work. So I did a proof of concept with a few master's students at Maastricht University. And that worked out really well. I learned a lot about what is open science, what are replications, how to do pre-registrations. But after doing this for 2 years and embarking on my journey as a tenure track, I understood that if I'm just going to be me and 2-3 students a year, we'll never map out anything. So we need to really scale up, mass collaborate around the world with as many students as possible. So coming here to University of Hong Kong, I changed the entire syllabus of the courses that I'm assigned to. And I started doing projects with my students from second year to fourth year undergraduate, where they do hands-on real replication work within the course. So within one course semester, we take a classic judgment and decision-making phenomenon. It could be about anything, but we start as simple as possible, things that I think that a second-year undergraduate that maybe had an exposure to t-test or ANOVA can handle, and that I can easily run on Amazon Mechanical Turk or Prolific, collect data. So within every semester, we do 20 of those. And then they do everything. I guide them together with teaching assistants. And finally, they do pre-registrations. I open everything for peer review on Twitter. I run the data collection. I give them the data sets. There's a whole process by which we do this. But after the first semester, it became clear that you can really do amazing projects with undergraduates. They are able to do real scientific projects. And now that we've summarized 3 years, we've concluded 100 of these replications and extensions of classics in judgment and decision making. So in terms of numbers, we're talking about 300 taught course students, plus about 30 guided thesis students. So we're talking about 330 students under my guidance and the teaching assistants. Now the question is, where does this become a cross-cultural, multi-country collaboration? And in order to bring this to the community, these are great projects done very well by the students, but I wanted to ensure that these meet the highest standards of the field and are able to be published. So this is why I decided to open everything up. So I invite early career researchers, just like yourself, to come in and take the lead. You become the first author, followed by our students, the teaching assistants, and me at the end, in order to verify everything that we've done, add your own analysis, do the introduction and discussion, and finally submit this to the journal and bring this to publication. Last year, we've done about 15 of those, so 15 publications. This year, hopefully even more than that. So altogether, we're talking about students and early career researchers working together collaboratively in order to bring replications and extensions of classics in judgment decision-making to journals on a very large scale. Through that, last thing I'm going to say about this before moving on is we've built a lot of resources. So everything that we do is collaborative. Everything is on Google Docs. We have very extensive guides on how to conduct a replication, how to do extensions, how to do a power analysis, effect size calculations, and everything is open for collaboration as well. So if you go in, first of all, you can use this as much as you want, take this, adopt this, run this within your own classes or universities, but you can also pitch in, edit everything, add in your name, and then you become a collaborator when we submit these resources to be a publication. So everything we do is collaborative, everything is shared, and we welcome anybody to join us in this kind of collaboration. In terms of numbers, we have about 50 early career researchers from around 20 countries, but we're very happy to have a lot from Europe and North America and here in Hong Kong, but we're especially interested in kind of branching out to places like Central, South America, Africa, and other places around the world that are less represented within our team. So looking forward to hearing from others and for you to join us if you'd like to.
That is really impressive. Did you say 100 replications? Did I get this right?
Yeah, 100
wow.
replications. Yeah.
Wow.
Completed.
I mean, also, I mean, if you would like to share the the collaboration links or anything that any resources that you would like to share, please feel free to send them after the discussion. I'm happy to share those with the participants as well. So that's amazing, and I think you also touched on a lot of the points that we will discuss when we walk through the process of how we can do such replications. But before, I want to give the word to Janis to introduce himself and also let us know a bit about the study or studies that he's been involved in.
Yeah, thank you. As you already said, Hannes, thanks for introducing us and me as well. I feel that there's not much left to say after these great introductions by the other three. So my name is Janis. I'm a postdoc at Aarhus University in Denmark at the moment at the Department of Management and Center for Integrated Business Psychology. I'm a social psychologist by training, but I'm now at the Department of Management. I'm kind of taking a detour. I don't know if I'll ever go back to the social psychology department in the near future, but I'm still working lots and mostly on social psychology at the moment. My research topics are social emotions and moral behavior. I'm mostly interested in positive emotions, human emotional crying, and dishonesty. And I'm mostly approaching that from a cross-cultural perspective. And since I'm doing this from a cross-cultural perspective, I always have to collect the studies in different countries. So it's kind of a default if you're a cross-cultural researcher. So that's something that kind of comes just by the perspective you're interested in. I've been probably involved in around 10 large-scale projects. I just got through everyone and counted it again because some of them I didn't have a huge impact on these. I just had a minor role, and some of them I had a major role. So 2 of them I left as the main researcher. Mostly in the first multi-lab project that we had around 12 countries, and I think the last ones that were just published recently by the Sociological Science Accelerator, I think we had 87 or something, 83, no, 87 it was. So you can see this increased quite a bit during the last years from rather small multi-lab projects to rather big ones. I have to admit that most of these projects weren't really focused on specific replication, so not close replications at least. They were always conceptual replications in a sense, but I personally think that there is not much original research anyway, because there is maybe some study out there already that did something similar. So I guess most research is a conceptual replication in a sense. So I guess it counts that most of these projects would fall under multi-country replications. And I mean, the important thing is that they, of course, replicate themselves when we do these studies in different countries. So many things I've done was through the Psychological Science Accelerator. I'm not sure whether everyone is familiar with that. I will probably use it quite a bit during the discussion. I would just abbreviate this as PSA. So just to be sure that you know what I'm talking about, the Psychological Science Accelerator is kind of a consortium of different researchers from different countries. I think at the moment they have around 1,200 something researchers across 82 countries. You can basically just sign up as a researcher with your lab or whatever, and then there are different studies that can be submitted and they get reviewed, and then in the end the communicator decides on whether they do the studies and whether you want to be involved or not. And so far, at least the first one has been published last year, I think, or was it this year? No, beginning of this year. I'm kind of getting lost in years due to the last years were a bit turbulent, as you might know. And recently, they also published another paper on some corona-related studies. And I think they have around 8 projects at the moment that are running. So really much going on there. In case you're not familiar with it, it's worth checking it out. It's also a good first step as an early career researcher or interested in these multiple lab replications to become involved in this initiative. So I've been partly involved in the translation and diversity committee. So that's mostly, I've been working also in some of these projects. I took the role of the translation coordinator, so I can tell you a bit more about how we manage translations and so on. And as I mentioned, in 2 of the projects that I did, I was the lead researcher, basically doing everything from thinking about the research question to writing it up and submitting it with lots of different collaborators involved. These were mostly around social thermoregulation. We also had something on positive emotions. We had something on perceptions of emotions across different countries, or facial perceptions across different countries. And the recent projects were on specific research topics related to the COVID pandemic. Yeah, that's about it, I guess. And I will just add the additional information later if we come to the specific question.
That's great. Thank you very much. So it's also really nice to see that you have seen projects from different angles. So as a collaborator in a minor role up to the leading role. So I think that will give you, or like that gives you a unique perspective, and also for the discussion today. Also, since you mentioned the psychological science accelerator, and especially the COVID paper. So I've looked at this COVID paper, and Sandra is here in the room today, who's a co-author. And what happened was, I actually wrote to Sandra saying like, oh, look, this new PSA paper, there's a lot of JRP people on it as well. And then I was looking further through the list of authors, like, oh, you were on this as well. So we actually found out that there's a lot of overlap between alumni of the Junior Researcher Program and people who are working on PSA projects now. So who knows, who knows how much more, all of the different, groups will intertwine now. So for going to the next part of the session, I structured this in a way that we will go through it as if we would approach a new study. So we will go through everything step by step. I just also wanted to repeat that since people have been involved to different levels, as you've now seen in the introductions, if there is any question that somebody doesn't feel comfortable with, or just doesn't have a view on it, or just because haven't really been involved in it, please feel free to skip a question. That's no problem at all. We're really looking for to gain new insights here, not to grill somebody of the details of their studies. I think there's enough people on Twitter doing that in a very mean way, and this is really something we should not do. So yeah, I'm looking forward to going through the steps of the research projects with you. And so the first step of any study is the study selection. So this could happen in multiple ways. So there could be a researcher sitting in their office saying, oh, I really want to do one of those multi-country things, but what topic should I choose? Or they read a paper and say, well, this has been hugely influential, but actually the original study isn't that massive, or maybe it's very old, so the researchers didn't have that much access to large scale populations, and it might be underpowered. So what I really would like to ask is, so which were the criteria that you used to determine which study you wanted to replicate? And then also, did you use a conceptual or direct replication? And also, so did you include any extensions to the study? Did you change anything in the model? And yeah, as many of you have been involved in multiple studies, feel free to choose from your projects. But Gilad, do you want to start and share your insights from one or two of your studies, maybe?
Sure. So I think mine is perhaps a little bit different because it's really not these mass collaborations in terms of data collection. It's more a mass collaboration in terms of who is involved in writing these things. I conduct most of my data collection with two major populations, Amazon Mechanical Turk Americans or prolific British. Plus we do participant pool samples undergraduates here at the University of Hong Kong. So these are 3 samples. By and large, it seems like, at least with judgment decision making, almost everything that we ran in multiple samples have replicated very well, to the extent that even the confidence intervals of the effect seem to be very similar to one another. So at least in our samples, it seemed to have a very consistent. In terms of which ones we choose, I still choose things based on my own preferences according to a certain criteria. Because we mass mobilize students as early as second year undergraduate, I want to make sure that it's feasible and doable. So one of the first criteria is as simple as possible. Classic effect in judgment and decision making, hopefully something that's impactful, that I think would be of use to me in my own research and to the academic community. So it's not like I had any doubts or something seemed suspicious. Quite the contrary, it's more like a tribute to these classics, a bit like with prospect theory. So it's something that's been very impactful, has affected me in my own research, and I've seen it has an impact on the literature. And I just want to revisit this in order to first, reassess, see, it's been a few years since prospect theory and the classics in the 70s. So does it apply to today? To what extent can we get a more accurate, perhaps, effect size based on larger samples and these kinds of things? And I think an important point that you raised is that we don't only do direct replications of the classics. So direct replications means reproducing all the materials that perhaps have been lost, trying the best that we can to adhere to what it is that they've done. But on top of that, add some meaningful extensions of 3 different kinds of extensions that would add additional insights. First, insights on, let's say that this phenomenon works and everything is as expected. What else do we want to know about this? But also preparing for the option that perhaps things don't work as expected. What could be a possible reason for that? So extensions could be, we focus mainly on things like adding a dependent variable. So after the replication is completed, you go to the next stage and then you add another dependent variable. Another classic option that we do is adding a condition that is a neutral condition or a control variable, control condition that wasn't there in the original. Sometimes we try and not do too many of those, but adding an individual difference predictor before the actual replications to see what would predict kind of changes in these kinds of things. But you need to do this in a very specific way. Each one of these 3 extensions are very easy to explain to students in the classroom and give them some examples, and they do a really remarkable job at coming up with some very, very insightful things. So things that I know can be done by students as simple as possible, based on classics in the judgment decision-making literature, hopefully as impactful as possible in terms of number of citations or impact on the literature, that I can run online with Amazon Mechanical Turk or Prolific, and are fairly easy to add extensions on so that we'll have something meaningful to add to the literature.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So you're taking a very pragmatic approach to, also taking into account what can you actually do and what, yeah. That's really interesting. So Janis, do you have a similar approach, or do you start from a different point?
Yeah, can I maybe just take a quick step back before we talk about that? I'm kind of chiming in now here on your moderation, which is not something I really want. I just want to give a quick overview that might help in classifying these projects into different categories, just that we are on the same page what we talk about. I think this might be helpful, but I won't do it if you don't want me to do it. It's just really quick.
No, please go ahead.
I thought it might just be helpful because typically, I mean, there's some papers looking at these large-scale replication projects and multi-lab projects There are some really good papers, and I can also send you, or you probably know them, and you can send them around to the rest of the people involved here. But typically you can differentiate between different aspects. So typically one is whether everyone is allowed to be involved in the project regarding the expertise, or whether it doesn't matter. So there are some projects where you could say, we only want to focus on experts in the field and want to have them join the project, or you could just say, well, anyone, even if they're not an expert in the field, could join that. And I guess the latter one is the one that has been quite common, at least in the registered replication projects, for example, and so on. The other thing that is something crucial about these multi-lab projects is whether this is a crowd replication project or a curated one. So whether there's a lead team that kind of decides on what to do and kind of sends out the updates, and whether they have specific roles, whether everyone that is involved decides together democratically on what they should do. And I guess in most of these projects, there's at least someone that is the PI, or several people that are the PI, in order to have some organizational context there. The other thing is, I think we mentioned that the kind of the level of replication, whether it's a closed replication or a more conceptual one. And the last one, which I think is really interesting, which we haven't seen that much around, but because of the perspective, so whether it's more an amicable replication, so everyone has the same idea, or whether you have an adversarial replication where two people from different groups go in and they have different ideas on what the outcome will be, and then they each kind of design their methods and bring that together in one big study. That's also quite interesting. I've seen it a bit around, not really in like large scale replications, but yeah, this was just to give some context. I'm sorry for distorting now the flow maybe a bit. But going back to the study selection, how you choose that, I guess it always depends a bit on what project I've been involved. So looking at the rather closer replications that have been involved, I think it was always, one thing was whether it was a high impact result. I think that was important, because if a study gets lots of citations, you probably think that, well, there's at least some certain validity to it. So focusing on doing a replication might be helpful. On the other hand, I think feasibility is quite important.
Janis, I think we lost you for a few seconds. Yeah, Janis, can you hear us? Because you just froze.
Can you still hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm still not there, I guess. I'm still not back.
You're there now, but it's still a bit robotic.
Yeah. Okay, I think I'm back now. Sorry for that. Which is good. Okay, sorry for that.
No worries.
I have a really bad internet connection at home, unfortunately. No.
Sounds good now again.
The most important aspect is about feasibility. Okay, good. I guess one of the most important aspects was about feasibility of the study. So whether this could be easily performed and done in different countries in an online environment, for example, or whether this has to be in lab with specific equipment that you need. I guess this is really something that drives the choice of the study and which study you want to choose. If you have really simple stimuli that you use, there's nothing really cultural loading, for example. If you have specific aspects that might be hard to translate in across different languages, for example, it might be not a good idea to focus on that. So it's often really about using the most simple setup that you can think of. And this is something, at least, that in my project, it has driven the method and the study selection quite a bit, which one we use.
Thank you. So yeah, it seems feasibility is really one of the key contributors to choosing the study. And this is also for those who will be able to join in the afternoon. We will have Alex Carstensen, who is part of one of the many baby studies, where I guess this is quite a bit more complicated. And yeah, Lana, do you want to talk about a bit how we selected the size for JRP replications and yeah, the criteria for that?
Yeah, for sure. So basically the one I was mostly involved in, it was basically the opposite of a classic study, because the study we ended up doing, literally the original paper came that year. So the paper was 2020. And what actually attracted, at least me, maybe Bojana will have some other insights, was that basically the paper was written as if the original authors really wanted somebody to come and replicate it. Like, you know how good paper should read basically like a cookbook? If you want to do it yourself, then. And basically it read like that. It also helped a lot that we managed to establish contact with the authors very quickly, very easily. They were delighted to hear about that. They took on somewhat of a, how would you say that? Maybe like observing role. So they did not impact our ideas or anything like that. Basically just observing and helping wherever they could. What else did I want to mention? I actually made some. So yeah, it had to be a conceptual replication, basically because the fault lines had to be adapted to each and every country. Maybe you can explain that a bit better if you want later, Bojana. Yeah, basically when you're within JRP, what you do not lack is early career researchers that are basically highly motivated to do some impactful science. And right now, I think the most impactful science we can do is open science, which is within basically the topic of all of this.
Thank you. Bojana, do you want to add something to this?
Lana, I think you said the most important things, but I was just thinking when Janis was speaking about sort of choosing studies that don't need a lot of adaptation for different cultural contexts. This was like the opposite of that, I think. So that was quite, challenging to sort of try to adapt the policy issues that were like basically the stimuli for the study, so that they make enough sense in the new context, but that they're also like similar enough so they are counted as a replication. So I would say, that was like the something that I think we sort of a little bit underestimated how complicated it would get. But on the other hand, I think it was a very like insightful experience in how to do these things and how to replicate these like politically highly, changeable studies, which are also like really important, I think, to generalize. So yeah, that's my sort of thing I wanted to add, basically. Yeah, I think, did I forget anything? I don't think so. Yeah, maybe just to add, so the original paper had 6 or 7 studies. I'm not entirely sure. We didn't have the capacity to 7. Thank you. So we didn't have the capacity, obviously, to replicate all of the 7 studies. So we focused on, and that was like another part that made it, slightly more complicated, is that first we replicated a study that from the paper that established the effect that we are talking about, so the overly negative group meta perceptions, and then we used that those results to inform the intervention study that was experiment 6, to sort of check whether this sort of a very brief disclosure intervention works in like reducing negative motive attribution. So we kind of had to have enough of a sample size in the first study to even be able to perform the second study in in that country. So we ended up not doing the second study in countries that we just couldn't get enough people in, and we needed a lot of people for being able to do the second study. So that was also something that we had to kind of coordinate during the process.
Thank you. So yeah, it seems really that the most important questions that people had in mind when choosing their topics was really the feasibility, and especially with a look at their very own personal or like institutional situation that they have and the resources that they have, which is really interesting, which is also why I think this discussion and the insights that we gain from it will be helpful for people with in different situations who want to run a large-scale replications in different countries. Some of you have already touched upon this topic, and Lana, you just said JRP is never short of motivated young early career researchers. So I will ask you to start with the next question, which is how did you or the principal investigator go about identifying and contacting collaborators? And was there sort of methodological approach to the selection, and how were collaborators approached?
All right, so basically collaborators were mostly JRP alumni, current JRP cohort of that year that was doing internship, and GLOBES students. So GLOBE students, they were at Columbia University under principal investigators under Kai's mentorship, and it was part of their curricula, extracurricular activity, not quite sure. So basically it was an interesting mix because they needed it for their actual course. Current JRP cohort of interns wanted to finish their JRP internship, and alumni are just people that were in contact with JRP before and just wanted to do something else, basically just on their own free will. So yeah, I'm actually very curious to hear more about what happens when you're actually in charge of those students as their professor. That's, I mean, how does that kind of collaborator dynamic go? That would be interesting for me to hear.
Great. Before I then hand it over to Gilad, is there, Bojana, is there anything you would wanted to add, or did Lana cover everything already?
I'm not sure if this comes now, but like the weird, non-weird.
I would take that separately, because I think that's something that we can evolve into a discussion.
Yes, agreed. Then I think Lana, you covered everything.
Okay, Gilad, do you want to continue?
Sure. Yeah, so the model for us is a bit different because it starts from my own courses. So I teach 3 courses. It covers judgment decision-making, advanced social psychology, and fundamentals of social psychology, different years, different courses. And I am not, judgment decision-making is an elective that I'm the only instructor for, so I'm the only one giving this, but it is an elective, so you choose this course. In the other 2 courses, I am one instructor of one session, and they have other choices. So I think an important thing over here is to ensure that students, when they come into these kinds of courses and become collaborators and co-authors for the very long term, that they know what is expected. And I have to say, to come into a university like University of Hong Kong that does things quite traditionally, and let's say an instructor with a PowerPoint goes, gives students the truth. Hear me, I'm the great professor, follow my lead, to my model, which is more based on what I did in Maastricht University with the problem-based learning, which is you have a problem, I will guide you, assist you, help you, but this is a journey that will go on together, and I don't have solutions for you. We'll figure this out together. So at the beginning, I got a lot of, how to say, pushback, criticism, skepticism. It's like, what is going on here? We don't understand the system. What is going on? So I think from the first semester when I ran this, and students were confused, the teaching assistant were confused, the department was confused, I learned that the most important thing in these kinds of collaborations and courses is setting expectations. So in the first 2 weeks of the course, we have the ad draw period, where I set expectations, very, very strictly, and say exactly what it means to collaborate, what is involved. I share all my evaluations very openly, so people will know the positives and the negatives. And I give people the chance to drop out and move to other instructors. In addition, I do a quiz on the syllabus, which is like 30 pages long, in order to make sure that everybody understands what this course involves. And a lot of it is exploration, uncertainty. Not everything is guaranteed. We don't know what's going to happen at the end, but for sure we'll learn a lot more by doing things hands-on. So I think people come in not really knowing anything about statistics and methods, and having a lot of doubts about what it means. Do I have what it takes as a second-year undergraduate to do a research project? But at the end of the semester, they have APA-style submission-ready manuscript with all the data collection and all the analysis, having gone through a very rigorous process, because we work, generally the gist of it is that we have 2 groups of 2 students who work independently on one target. During the whole process, they peer review one another, so they experience the academic process of giving peer review, providing and receiving. They get assistance from the teaching assistants, from myself. I open everything up on Twitter, so people come in. Sometimes the original authors come in and comment on their Google Docs and give them feedback, which is nice. In the upcoming semester, we're going to do the peer community and register reports with the scheduled reports, where official journal reviewers are going to come in a certain period during, after they submit the pre-registrations, in order to give them feedback, journal publication feedback. So we're doing everything in order to give them the sense that it's not based on outcomes, whether they're right or wrong, but it's based on comprehensiveness and transparency, and how much they share and how much they're able to learn from the feedback that they receive. So all this process has a lot of uncertainty and all sorts of things that need to learn, but setting expectations in advance for this collaboration is very, very important. And once we agree on this, they, of course, are co-authors till this gets, until publication. This is like the first stage with the students. Afterwards, how do I recruit the collaborators as early career researchers? At the beginning, I didn't even think about this option. I just thought, it will be in my file drawer, which is counter to the whole prospect of things. But once I was, I think, 2018, 2019 in SIPS, Society for Improvement of Psychological Science, and in some open science workshop, I think it was in Padua in Italy, and I met some early career researchers. Then I realized like a lot of eager early career researchers want to take part, but they don't have any opportunities because everything is so high risk. So getting involved in this kind of thing, finding collaborators, is very, very complicated. And there I was sitting on, what was it, 40 back then, completed manuscripts in my file drawer. And then I asked people, so would you like to take lead on this and help us to bring this to publication? And they seemed very enthusiastic about this. So then I thought, okay, so let's just set the terms. Once again, setting expectations. So we have a very elaborate Google Doc where I explain exactly what it means to join us. And then on Twitter and in workshops that I was giving around the world, I started from Europe, but then I ventured out to other places in Asia, in Europe, and in North and South America. I just explained what it is that we do. I gave some examples, and then I asked who wants to join. And so far, I have not refused anybody. So anybody who showed interest and wanted to join, basically you say which of the replications you would want to help write up. Right now we have between 40 and 50 of those that are available for you. So you tell me what's interesting for you. I share all the Dropbox with everything that the students did, all the pre-registrations, the OSF and all that. And then you can decide whether it's, you want to take the commitment or not. Sometimes we have collaborations between, two early career researchers that love working with one another. So one is more methods oriented and one is more write-up oriented, theory or the literature, so they can come together. Sometimes we have a model where the early career researcher has a mentor, so he's funded PhD or funded postdoc. That's also a possibility, that both the mentor and the early career researcher join together, but we give the first co-authorship, the lead co-authorships to the students and the early career researchers. So we just, once they see all the terms, all the setting expectations, they've gone through all the materials, that's when we embark on this journey together. In addition, we have a very active Slack channel. So now all the early career researchers are helping one another. We have a lot of experience, so we've done quite a few of those. So we share everything with one another. It became kind of a small community, a movement of sorts. So anybody who's interested can just go read our Google Doc, see what the expectations are, tell us which one of the projects is interesting, and then we can pick it up from there.
Thank you. And it really seems like this collaborative spirit and people, choosing to take part in these sort of collaborations seems to be key for all of the successful replications in terms of the project was successful, not necessarily the result, obviously. But that is great. I have before I move to Janis, I have a question that maybe is moving away a little bit, but I would just be really interested because you say you give people the opportunity if they're not interested in that part or in such collaborations to also change their courses. So I'm wondering, do you think that sort of approach actually brings people who at the beginning might have not so much been interested in research to practically experience it? Does it bring them, or do you think this brings more people to research than it would with the normal approach, or like the conservative older approach?
Yeah, I think students who did not even consider research as something that they would like to do, I'm not even talking academia, but also in the industry, data analytics or whatnot, behavioral insights teams and all that. I think after the semester is done, a lot of them come and they even write this in the evaluations, is that they have a completely different understanding of what it means to do research. I think also we tend to think that students don't know what's going on because we don't inform them of the so-called reproducibility crisis. So they're not familiar. They're familiar. They go online, they research these things, they hear. And then if we don't talk to them about this, if we don't involve them in this, they become very cynical and skeptical about everything that we tell them. So I think through the lens of involving them and being very straightforward about this is what's happening, we need your help, come and join us with this, they have renewed positive view of what it means to do research. So research is really self-correcting. There is a prospect of us contributing, even if we're not only senior researchers from Princeton, Stanford, and Ivy League. So even if you're an undergraduate from a university like University of Hong Kong with very little understanding of things, you can pick up these skills and you can have a meaningful contribution to the general research academic community that has impact on people's lives. I think especially during COVID times, you see the importance of open science and being transparent and doing things collaboratively. So I think a lot of them have renewed faith in science, in the scientific process. So if one of the greatest benefits of having a course like this is really changing mindsets. And I think a lot of them, I've had the 2 MPhil students that graduating this year and wanted to join me, started from sitting in my courses and saying, this is exactly the kind of thing that I want to do. How can we do more of this? And I think all the research that's been done by the early career researchers. So they come in not really understanding. So what is open science? So how do we do these complicated things like pre-registrations? What does it mean to share everything openly? So by the end of the collaboration, they have a completely new understanding, hands-on experience in how to do this well. And I think it's contribution to future generation of these researchers as they make progress. One of the nice things about this, which was an unexpected side effect, is that we publish these. So if you join us, you also have publications, and this is really important to have open science early career researcher competitive enough in this very difficult job market. So not only are you doing best practices, but also there's something here to also help you survive this very difficult circumstance of what's happening right now in academia. So that's kind of like the very broad goal of how we try to do things.
Yeah, I really like this approach, and I think it also very much overlaps with how JRP is approaching things, to really look at this as a community and working together with these hands-on approaches, and then really to provide the opportunity in a positive thinking community. And Janis, I would like to hand it over to you to give us a few insights on how did you go about, or maybe the PSA go about identifying and contacting the collaborators.
Yeah, I try to be really brief now, I think. So 5 or 6 years ago, in the more early days of doing this multi-lab research, we sat together just as the lab, and we were like, who do we know from other countries that we can just contact and ask them whether they want to be involved? And then we just came up with a list. Oh yeah, I've known this person, I've met her or him at a conference. Let's just ask her. And we sent out around 50 emails or so, and then we had this collaborators, approximately 40 collaborators across all different continents. So that's how it started. And then based on that, we went further, and then we used the PSA resources and further projects, because they have outreach to 82 countries or something like that. We posted that on different boards and different emails that the PSA sent, and we also use StudiesWeb. I'm not sure whether people are familiar with StudiesWeb. I'm not sure whether it's still that active, but it's a really nice platform. It was once set up on the Open Science Framework, and there you can just post whether you need participants for a study or whether you have participants for a study, and then other researchers can come in and just say, hey, that's great, we're a great fit, let's do it together. And that's also a way how we try to recruit researchers from different backgrounds. The PSA has done it similarly, I think, starting with personal contact as well, posting this openly in Twitter, for example, whether people are interested. And I think the word just spread around so that lots of people were interested in joining. In the committee that's kind of trying to increase the diversity of the PSA, we're also trying to focus specifically on how we can represent more underrepresented countries or regions at the moment. And there are different strategies, for example, just translating the material that we have into different languages, because some researchers might not be that familiar with English that they would really want to engage in joining these different multi-lab replications. So and there has been also specific endeavors to, for example, target African researchers recently in the PSA. So that's something that has at least progress there. One thing is that sometimes you need funding in order to attract more researchers from different countries that are underrepresented. And so far, the PSA doesn't really have that much funding that they would have liked to have to wanted to really go into these big projects and to really help getting lots of people from underrepresented countries. And I think there's some problem with that, because in many of these multi-lab projects, you're mostly collaborating with early career researchers or maybe even students or people.
I'm sorry, I think we lost you again. You turned to a robotic voice, but I think the video is clear. Can you try again?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I can do that. Is it better now?
Yeah, no, the sound is great. It's just the sound comes a bit before your video reacts. So, but okay. I think I can hear you. Yeah.
I can just turn on my video if that helps.
I think it does. Yeah.
Okay. So I think most of these people involved in this project are early career researchers or maybe even students. And I think there's a problem with, for example, early career researchers. They typically, I mean, they do this in their free time, so to say. I mean, they typically have a different project and they contribute to these projects with their free time. Mostly maybe also unpaid free time, to be really honest, in some countries. And it doesn't really help them career-wise maybe to be the 250 co-author on a large paper than having a big project themselves, you know? And I mean, this depends a lot on the incentive structure that we have nowadays. And I guess it would be really helpful to change that in certain ways. So it seems that I think there's somewhat a high bar to involve these people. So involving students or undergraduates in a course and doing that, so what you've talked about, I think is actually a great solution to do that and to conduct replications. So what you've been talking about, and also what the collaborative reproducibility education project, the CRAP JRP has been doing, I think these are really great initiatives and they really help to do that.
Thanks. And you're touching on one point that we are really hoping to turn into a full-blown discussion here, which is how do you involve contributors from weird and underrepresented countries? So on the one hand, obviously, how do you collect data there? But equally, or maybe even more important, how do you get researchers from those countries into such collaborations? And how do you contact them? How do you find them? Maybe they're not as, you know, they're not in those tight nets that maybe European institutions have through conferences, or the same, you know, also North American institutions have through, you know, I mean, at the moment with COVID times, maybe not so much, but usually, like, you know, going to 2 or 3 conferences a year, meeting new people. So yeah, and yeah, Janis, since you already touched upon this topic, what do you think? What is a good way to get people from, or to get researchers and samples from underrepresented countries? And did you have any experience with maybe within the PSA or in other collaborations where it worked really well, or maybe any approaches where you figured, okay, this didn't work at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's something we've been struggling with for a long time, I think. So looking at these registered replication reports that came out in Perspectives on Psychological Science, and also later in the new established advances in psychological science and so on, I think 90% of these were the collaborators, and 90% of these were from North America or Europe. So that wasn't really a balanced representation there. For the PSA, we've tried some outreach strategies, and they've helped more or less. But if we look at the map, for example, many countries from Africa are not represented, for example. So there have been recent endeavors to actually overcome that problem. And one issue there is, for example, that in many African institutions, at least from what I've known, it seems that IRB process, for example, they cost some money. So you actually need funding in order to be part of that. And it might be a high bar if you don't have enough funding to take part in this replication project. So actually having money and incentives for underrepresented countries can be one possibility to help them to become involved in these projects. Another thing that might help is to have some outreach. So for example, in previous projects, we had one person from China, and he was really involved in the open science movement in China. So he could get us in touch with many people there. And that really helped to get lots of collaborators from China, for example, that didn't know. So he translated everything to Chinese, for example, in order to get lots of people attracted. So having these more local people, for example, might also help. But of course, how to attract these more local people in the first place, that's of course also a question. So I don't know, Gilad, for example, can talk about his own experience of being in Hong Kong and might have more personal contacts to people that are maybe more often underrepresented in at least Western psychology research, and might have more ideas about how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, Gilad, if you want to directly, so at this point of the panel, please feel free to also directly react to anything that your fellow panelists say. Also, for everybody who's in the audience, if you have any specific questions about a topic that we're talking at the moment, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will see if we can integrate them. But otherwise, we will also keep the questions from the chat for later. So I would just like to open the floor to further to the discussion on involving contributors from non-weird and underrepresented countries.
Okay, so I'll just comment on the Hong Kong angle. Unfortunately, Hong Kong is very weird, capital letter weird. First of all, in the university, everything is conducted in English. They're considered in the literature to be native English speakers, given the former British colony history. Things are easy in Hong Kong. That said, we have a lot of links to mainland China. So we have increasingly more and more researchers that conduct research in mainland China. And there are possibilities, opportunities of extending that. And I know for a fact that there's a very large WeChat group, like a WhatsApp group, and it's very active with open science. I think with the same person who is a PSA coordinator in mainland China. So he's doing an amazing job just promoting this kind of thing. So if you're not sure whether you can collaborate in mainland China or not, you can if you get in touch with that group. And I think you'll find a lot of enthusiastic collaborators. In terms of how to reach other cultures, I've not done a good job at this. I think it's because it's just like a one-man operation. Basically, it's like it all revolves around me being able to reach out and recruit these kinds of things. But I've done the best that I can. And before COVID hit, COVID caught me at the beginning of a tour in South America and Brazil, where I was supposed to go through Brazil, Chile, Peru, and all this in order to talk to people in person. And I think it makes a big difference if you actually go over there and show that, sit down with them, explain everything to them. Not that Brazil is, very far behind. It has its own kind of sort of weird attributes. However, there's, from there you can extend further. So I'll just give an example. Once we have 100 replications and extensions with everything open, all the call checks on the OSF and all that, then anybody, including people in Brazil, South America, Africa, and all that, can just take this as is. They don't even have to involve us and just translate the call checks material, even use the same pre-registration materials as us. Take as much as you want, take all of that, and focus on just training your students to, could be just a basic translation to, in Brazilian case, to Portuguese, but going through the process of open science and running replications. And this is exactly what's happening right now in Brazil. They're taking some of our replications in judgment decision-making, translating this and going through the whole process. Once they have some of that experience from this semester, hopefully we can scale up. I don't think this would have happened if I would not physically go there and explain things and show them just how simple it is for them to do this. So I really think some of the outreach is to go there, but COVID kind of made things a lot more difficult. I try and do this by giving workshops online on all sorts of topics, and then through the workshops explain what's possible and what's not. But it's difficult to reach them, especially during these times, especially if we require things that are more kind of complicated, elaborated in lab. So that's going to take a while until the world gets a grip and gets back to normal. If anybody has any other thoughts of how to do this, I'm very interested. But we have not done a very good job with this. Aside from let's say Brazil and a few places in Asia, I've not been able to reach these collaborators, and we are looking for more of that. But I just want to say, you don't need to be our collaborator in order to do these. You can take everything that we've done and use this in any way. You can run this as is or adjust this in any and I hope that what we do will have impact with us or without us, just by the fact of us doing open science and sharing everything, putting it out there.
I would say here that we have basically two separate questions here. So how are we going to find non-weird collaborators, and how are we going to collect non-weird participants? Simple. So I think within collaborators, so out of our 26 it was countries, Non-European ones were Canada, States, Israel, Puerto Rico, and Sudan. So
and Turkey.
And Turkey, yes, that's correct. So basically, with that one, we kind of dipped our toes a bit here, a bit there, but already it's not second, it's third replication that's now underway. Not to spoil too much what's going on, and I'm also not has been as heavily involved in that one. Now really has quite well sample regarding non-weird collaborators. But it's also important to keep in mind the topics. For example, like what has happened with this one, we also managed to find a collaborator from Iran. However, when we went into the basically adapting and translating the materials, it basically turned out, and we actually had a talk about it with the ethics department in Columbia University and all of that, that because we're talking about political topics, it might be actually dangerous for our collaborator to do that. I mean, we did, of course, keep her, but we couldn't use the we didn't even start collecting the data because of that reason. So I think basically to sum it up, I think we as JRP are getting much better in non-weird collaborator recruitment. However, when it comes to participants, to samples, I think it's still, it needs to be double, triple assessed based on the topic.
Yeah, if I can add to that, in terms of the third collaboration, I'm also not as heavily involved, but I was involved in data collection for Serbia. And what I saw kind of happening with this replication from the beginning, there was sort of a conscious decision to, because the US and especially Europe are overrepresented, right? We have too many people that want to collect data and participate from Europe, and we just, to be honest, don't need that many people from each European country because we can handle it with less people. But then what we decided to do is to have these people, I'm not entirely sure how the decision process, who these people are going to be happened, but basically we have collaborators that whose primary task is that outreach. So like actively trying to find collaborators from non-weird countries. And I'm not, and I wish we had somebody from the core team from the third replication here as well, but I'm not entirely sure how the process went, but looking at the results now, it's pretty impressive. Like the number of countries and sort of every continent is represented with, I think, more than 3 countries for sure, and I think over that as well. So yeah, I think that could be maybe one approach. So if we have like representation from Europe, for example, like use some people to specifically recruit and sort of train and help support non-weird collaborators in data collection. So yeah, yeah, maybe next year we can have somebody from that replication once it gets out there and hear about the process.
I see.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to mention a point regarding what Bojana was saying. For this last year replication, I was the pod leader of the MENA region. So a place where it's quite challenging to find collaborators. And what I found very interesting is actually seeing people reaching out to Kai, especially, and just saying, I'm from this country. We don't have many research opportunities here. Can I collaborate? And so I think it's also coming from the other side. And when you have people that are so highly motivated, it's very interesting to see. They just look for their own opportunities. And, you know, I think that's something to keep in mind. Obviously, we need to go look for them, but also I think it's starting to be more like it's easier also for them to just look for opportunities. I think this person was just like looking on LinkedIn. She found Kai and email saying like, I want to collaborate. And by chance, this project was going on at that time. So I think also from those countries, there are people that are so motivated and they're looking for opportunities. And I think that was really great to see from my perspective. Sorry, just wanted to chime in with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Federica. Janis, I think you wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, just a really quick comment. So, I mean, if you have endless funding, then recruiting people from underrepresented countries, I don't think it's a problem. There are many panels that could actually do that job for you. Or, I mean, even Prolific has, in many countries that might not be included in many projects, have enough participants that you could reach. It's not super representative, I know. But I mean, if you have lots of money, then panels is the solution there. But I guess it's not the default for these projects in most cases. Another comment is that, I mean, the organizers did a really great job. I think we already, like, maybe not in this session here because it has some specific time constraints, but like overall, I think the diversity of the people involved is quite good. But I guess what is also something that we should be aware of is that many of the questions that we ask and many of the methods that we use are really focused on a specific perspective, geographically, but also culturally. You might call that a more Western perspective. I'm not sure whether I'm a big fan of calling it like that. But for example, just starting a project with materials in English kind of sets already the stage to, for example, include different collaborators, but also to already have a specific mindset. I think involving lots of different people, lots of different cultures, at least if you want to do a cross-cultural study, it's already started the inception stage. So at choosing what to actually perform and how to do that. And I guess this selection process is only determined by a handful of people, which might also make sense because it kind of reduces the time that is needed for that. If you have 60 people involved in choosing a certain study, it might be really hard and might really take a long time. But this, of course, directs us on a certain perspective and limits us in what we can achieve, I guess.
Yeah, those are really great points, and I think we're advancing a lot on this topic. And I don't want to close it down at this. I'd rather skip over some of the other questions that we have. But Jarke, you wanted to give some input here as well?
Yeah, no, just a small point relating to what Janis said. I guess, like, I was also thinking when we were discussing the like the conceptualization and design of the study, like about involving people from non-weird cultures at the data collection stage, and what we might be missing out on by not involving them sooner, like at the design stage. So I mean, one, there's like, I mean, and I'll bring this up later in the second panel, but there's an inherent like kind of power dynamic when non-weird collaborators are kind of approached only at the data collection stage to collaborate on things. So there's obviously room for improvement in that sense, but also just like, what are we missing out on when we only look at replications in non-weird cultures when we're collecting data? Like, if we involve people sooner, there could also be discussions of the actual theory that you're trying to replicate and whether that is actually valid in certain cultures, or whether there needs to be like you know, a pilot study and or exploratory study in different cultures to see if that theory even kind of applies to that region. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks. That's also a really good point. So so I guess in a perfect world, we would have people from underrepresented countries actually leading the replications, and then bringing people from Western countries on board, and you know, to have their specific perspective and their leadership on these sorts of things. But as we've just discussed, it seems still quite a bit away. But I do think that we got a lot of really good points here, which, I mean, obviously funding is always you know, an important issue. If you have enough money, you can probably I mean, if there's not COVID, like Gilad says, you know, just go over there, talk to people, involve them, get their opinions, tell them how you give them the materials to work with, which, you know, is also especially if we talk about poorer institutions, that, you know, maybe they don't even have the access to certain materials. There is still a lot of especially testing materials, like if we talk about intelligence testing, for example, materials that are still extremely expensive and paywalled by publishers. So yeah, to really get a collaboration and not just, you know, have people collect a few data sets, although that would already even be a good start just to have the data. So I think also the point that Lana made, that there is a huge difference between getting data from specific countries and having collaborators on board is really essentially day and night. Yes, so thank you all for this discussion. I'm also aware that we sort of skipped the break, but actually I think the discussions are going so well, and I'm personally I'm feeling very involved and very enthusiastic. So I'm just asking this question to the panel now. Would you like to take a 5-minute break, or would you be happy with just going through?
I'm good without the break, but whatever the group decides.
Same.
Would anybody want the break, or? Okay, great. Then, or Janis?
I'll just get some water, but I'll take my headphones with me. So
great.
Go on.
Great. Then let's continue. And we're moving on. The next question that we have on the list is translation. I'm actually going to go through this a bit quicker and ask you the question in this way. So the classic version of translating studies and using them in multiple countries is a back and forth translation. Did anybody use a different approach, or did anybody adapt the classic approach of, you know, one person takes so you have usually it's the English version, which might be a problem, as we just discussed as well. It gets translated back, and then you look at the differences and you make it appropriate to the country and the language. Was there anybody who used a different approach? And yeah.
I can maybe briefly start with that. So at the PSA, we modeled it on the back translation procedure. I mean, there are many different procedures that you can do. There's a great review from 2007, I think, by Char and colleagues that looks at 4 different ways to translate material, and they arrived at none of the superior one, maybe a combination of these, but I think this hasn't been really systematically tested. And the PSA has a project, at least it's in its inception, and they actually want to do that. So they want to kind of piggyback on a different project and use different translation methods to see which one is actually the most valid one. So that would be a great result and great helpful for these multi-lab projects. What the PSA has done is modeling on the back translation, always using 2 people per translation phase. So always 2 people translating from English to the target language, and always 2 people translating from the target back to English. And then this is all compared. This has been quite messy. And for some projects, I think we abandoned the 2 people and just use 1 person for that. I mean, the problem is you always need 2 bilinguals basically for each round. And this is maybe not feasible for all countries. And what we also added is a third stage in the end, basically giving that to other people not involved in academia, and see whether they have a question again. But I hope that you could.
Yeah, I think we lost you for a second, but I think your point was to also send it to people who are not in academia, just to make sure they understand the concept and everything. Yeah, which is also a fun thing in terms of data protection, and we'll see if we have time to discuss that part as well. But did anybody else would like to add anything on the translation? Any specific points, any specific experiences that you had, something that might have worked really well or that was problematic? Okay, if not, we're moving on to a part. Yes.
No, I mean, I could just quickly do one real thing. Is the problem is that in every project we've used a different way of doing the translation, and there is no standardized version of doing that. We've tried to look at having a more standardized tool in order to ease the whole process, but we haven't done it so far. And I guess it's one of the main obstacles as well, and how to structure that, how to do that. So far, we've worked with different Google Sheets, and it's just so cumbersome. And there should be an easier way to do that. And well, I guess that's one main problem with translation as well.
Yeah, definitely. So also, I mean, also to bring in just my 2 cents from my personal experience. So I'm German, and I've worked on Austrian translations as well, which, you know, is technically German, but I always had the lucky factor that I lived in Austria for some years, and so you do spot a few things that, you know, you just know Austrians would find very strange to read, and I guess this is also also an issue in other countries where you have the same language but local differences, and definitely in Arabic, where there are so many different dialects that you might have to retranslate it for multiple countries. Yes, but coming to a fun topic, ethics. So this is, of course, a very tricky one if you go through multiple countries, because different countries have different laws, different institutions have different review boards and different guidelines. Different ethics institutions interpret data law, for example, differently. So the question here is, how did you approach the IRB or the ethics board? And the main question here being, did the principal investigator go to their IRB and ask them, and it was just taken over for all of the for the whole investigation, or did you have to go through multiple IRBs? And also, and this leads back a bit to translational issues, did you have the translations ready to all countries if you went through the one IRB approach? And I would like to give the word to Bojana, maybe.
Yeah, so thankfully for the fault lines replication, we could do everything through Colombia. I believe that we had to sort of, once the translations were done and the Qualtrics materials in all countries were done, then we had to sort of supplement that for the ethics as well. And I think that it was a bit tricky. The one part that was a bit tricky was that all team members responsible for data collection in like different countries had to like write a letter that's also, I think, Lana, correct me if I'm wrong, like signed by the local institution that like the language is appropriate. But then not all students were affiliated with a university at the time. So that was a bit, you know, we sort of handled it on the go. But
yeah, so basically, oh, yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just want to quickly clarify. So basically, the letter had to state that whoever signed it confirms that all of the materials are appropriate in terms of both culture and language. And so, yeah, that could have been that based on what they wanted. I think they wanted somebody who could, let's say, attest to that. So maybe somebody in a senior position, somebody who is native. So at some point we had to get quite creative due to basically some people not having affiliations, COVID as well. But I think everything was, thank God, at the end, ethically sound, I would say.
Thank you. Gilad, how did you approach these?
Oh, it's much simpler in my case because it's not I don't collect data around the world. I do all the data collection. Everything is conducted here. So everything is University of Hong Kong ethics committee. I think perhaps the nice trick, you might call this, is that we didn't actually have to go through an ethics approval for each one of the 100 replications, but we have sort of like a template of what it means. So based on the fact that these are classics published in the literature, and we do vignette style, no potential harm, etc., 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 we simply listed the entire list of replications that are planned. We explained the kind of extensions that we can do and that they also do not pose any potential harm. And we get the approval as a rubric to all of these replications within the following semester or academic year. So that saves a lot of time. And this is doable because these are replications of published findings, known in the literature, and our extensions are so well defined that it's very easy to explain what it is that we do in each one of those. So there are really no concerns to ponder. So that's maybe the only contribution that I can do here, but we haven't really done multiple country collaborations that require different ethics approvals.
Thank you. So that's actually a really good idea, really, to highlight that in replications, a study has already been conducted, which has been approved or would have been approved by an ethics committee before. So Janis, I know the PSA has a different approach to this, right?
Yeah, we had a different approach to that. And I think ethics was always the topic that produced the most headache. And I think it's also the one aspect that is the biggest obstacle for people to join the project. Because at the PSA and also at the ones that we've been using, it's typically the way that each lab has to do their own ethics approval from the IRB board. There's some exceptions. If they don't have a local ethics board, for example, then they can just state that the research is okay to produce, and sometimes they use a senior colleague, for example, to attest that. But this is just one adaptation that we had to use in order to get everyone covered. Because IRB rules really differ a lot. For example, I worked in Norway, and if it's just one small pinch of probably non-anonymous data, you have to get to the NSD, which is the National Security Data Agency, and they have to do that. And for example, in Germany, I had some colleagues that were like, "Oh no, we don't get IRB. We don't have a board at all. We just do the study." And I was really surprised by that. So it's a big obstacle because, for example, even in the same country, we sometimes have multiple labs from the same country. They always have to get IRB at the specific institution, and this is really a variable that it's hard to foresee how it works out, because sometimes people come secured within 1 week, and we had cases where it took 9 months or something. And an issue is then when the IRB comes back and says, "Hey, we need an adaptation here. This doesn't work that way." And then it depends a bit on what the adaptation is and whether you can actually do that, whether it still makes sense to perform it in this country at all. In one project, we had one case where the ethics board in some South American country, I don't remember which one, said that the studies we were using could induce depression in participants, while the other 20 countries involved didn't see any problem with that. So we couldn't change the stimuli based on that. So we just had to exclude that researcher, unfortunately. And that's always the question. Sometimes it's just one question that needs to be adapted. For example, in France, you're not allowed to ask about ethnicity, I think. That's always the thing if you have someone from there. So that if it's just one item that gets out, then it might not be a big problem. But this has actually resulted in countries that are lost because of this obstacle of ethics. And often these are more underrepresented countries as well. So this is kind of a double problem, so to say.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, and I'm just wondering if there, and this goes to anybody in the panel, is there anything that you remember that might be like a universally applicable, not solution to everything? I don't think we have that. That would be the dream, but is there anything universally that you could apply or that you try to apply with different ethics boards, review boards, that really help to solve one of the big issues? Is there anything specific that comes to mind? or is it so specific to each situation that there are really no tips that could be given?
I mean, I guess it sometimes helps for some ethics board that you already had secured IRB approval from the host university of the people that kind of led the project. That helps in some cases, but not in all. And I mean, it might be helpful in some cases to see that a certain university in Europe has already secured ethics, but I mean, it really depends on the regulations that you have. And the problem is also that I just forgot to mention that sometimes they want to have the translated version already of the material, sometimes they don't. So the specific labs or sites are often they differ significantly in at what point of the research process they're in. And this really complicates lots of things. It also complicates doing a registered report, for example, because the typical rule there is to only involve people that already have secured ethics. Yeah, so I don't have, there's no obvious solution to these problems, at least from what I know, unfortunately.
Yeah, so ethics really is one of the biggest topics and the biggest hurdles in these sorts of replications. If you have multiple IRBs, not just from institutions, but multiple countries, multiple continents, and multiple languages involved. And there's obviously the issue of data security and data protection. So especially in Europe with the general data protection regulation, you have to be very specific in what you tell your participants, as long as they're, I mean, if they're anonymous, you're usually fine. Although we had some issues in one study as well with a review board that just decided to interpret the law differently than from what it was written. In the end, we came to a good conclusion, but this is where, you know, review boards sometimes, you know, overlap with data security. And then it can be a tricky topic to match what is ethical and what is lawful. Let's focus on a very specific part of this. So due to reasons from, or due to input from an ethics board, or due to data privacy regulations in specific countries, did you have to adapt your methodology in any way? Yeah, and Janis, you already touched upon this. And then also the question, did you collect data centralized? So was there like was there just a PI who received all the data and people shared the survey, for example? Or did all of the collaborators have have access to the data from right when it was collected? And yeah, oops, sorry. Lana, do you want to start?
Sure. Data collection was centralized, basically we collected data using Qualtrics, and basically participants would have be presented with materials in their own language. They would select their region, and that's basically how it got in one, let's say, huge data set, but you can, yeah, then separate it however you want. And I'm sorry, what was the other question? I'm slightly lost.
Sorry. Yeah, did you have to adapt the methodology based on any feedback from the review board, or or based on data protection regulations?
I would say no, but I'm not completely sure. So maybe Bojana, do you know?
I would also say no, but I'm not entirely sure. I do remember the France ethnicity question. I saw it in some communication that we had to just, yeah, basically not ask that question in France. But other than that, I'm not sure. Actually, Janis, do you know? Because you are kind of the GDPR person in the JRP.
So yeah, I do remember that. I mean, not to the methodology. The only thing that I remember we needed to do was to edit the privacy notice, which does make a lot of sense. But then also,
Right, yes.
so the privacy notice is in GDPR. So this really comes back to, are you collecting anonymous data or non-anonymous data? So as long as you cannot identify people from, and this is good advice for any researcher doing online questionnaires in Europe. As long as data collection is anonymous, GDPR does not apply. So you don't have to put a privacy notice. From an ethical standpoint, of course, you still have to tell your participants what sort of questions they're going to answer, and how long it will take, and all of these sort of things. But if there is a good reason to believe that a person can be identified from the data that they provide to you, you would have to give them the rights, all the rights that people have to their data, which are 5 different rights to their data in GDPR. It's a very long list. And I think we do have learned, not only from our work, but also from others, that those sort of privacy notices can be very off-putting to participants because they're very long and very technical, and you cannot really shorten them or put them in full lay language, because you just have to give them all of their rights as they're written in the law. Yeah, but I won't want to talk too much about GDPR. But Janis, do you want to comment on this as well? Did you have to adapt studies specific? You already talked about maybe taking out an item in France, but were there any other things in the questionnaire itself, for example, that you need to change, or any methodological approach that you need to change?
We had a recent project where in one country we need to take out lots of items from the questionnaire. So this is still discussed among the lead authors, whether that's feasible or not, whether it can be helpful. We didn't have any methodological changes ethics-wise, but mostly infrastructure-wise. So I remember one project where we had videos displayed to participants, and we had some countries where internet connection was either just really slow, just as it seems here in Denmark the case for me today, but also some people could not access the video at the host. For example, we had this, I think it was a problem in China that they couldn't access YouTube. I'm not sure whether that was the case. Maybe I'm misremembering that. So we needed to adapt a different version of the material, and we kind of made a different design of the study, a second design that collaborators that had problems with internet connection, for example, could then use. So that was something that kind of made the project quite differently based on these issues, but it wasn't related to ethics.
And I guess this is a question to everybody. Do you think the impact of such changes are measurable? Is there anything of keeping, or I mean, at least you can keep track, of course, right? Because you can just write down, we planned this, and then we had to adapt because of this. But do you think there's any way of estimating the impact that might have? I just take that as a no. I guess.
I mean, you can control statistically for that if the change is not as too substantive. But I mean, if you're using a completely different design, it's really hard to compare effects, even though you have standardized them. I mean, yeah. I guess that's a different question that goes beyond the scope of the current discussion.
That's right. So Gilad, I think so this current question then doesn't really relate too much to you, but I'll start with you with the next question, which is on the statistics. And we don't want to go in too much detail here, also because we're getting closer to the end of it. So in terms of statistics, we thought the most interesting thing to know would be, on a high level, how did you approach analyzing the data of a replication? So of course, you need to make a choice on how you calculate the power, also especially, and with that the sample size, and then make a decision on what statistical method, what statistical tests are you using? Do you use the same that have been used in the original, or do you use something that might have, if you replicate something really old, maybe in the past 20 years, it has turned out that a different sort of approach works better. So how did you choose the statistical approach? And then also a very tricky question, if you chose different statistics, how did you decide if a study replicated or not?
Yeah, complicated topic. It's hard to cover this in a few minutes, but I will say that we focus on direct replication. So the main task for the students, the people who conduct the replication, is to follow step by step what the original did. A lot of feedback that we get from reviewers is, why didn't you do this? Because in the last 40 years, we've discovered that. I always respond in the same way, in that replicators are not meant to fix problems in the original. First, we want to know whether the original really replicates or not. Then we can add exploratory analysis. We can do some more advanced stuff. But first of all, we want to know whether these things hold. If we run the exact same thing once again, does it replicate or not? Another pushback that we usually get is that we started off by using the original's effect size as an estimate for the power analysis. And then reviewers are like, but we know from 2015 science paper that the effect size for those who replicate is about half. How do you know? Have you done this for judgment and decision making? So actually, from our experience in judgment decision making, sometimes we get the same effect size, sometimes we get much stronger effect size. On average, we get about the same effect size for the replications. So the assumption that you can generalize from this science paper or from this many labs to a different domain, I think we need a lot of humility when we come and we look at these things. Since then, I've found ways to power above and beyond. So we sometimes use the Simonson small telescopes, 2.5 times the sample size. Sometimes one time I was able to get the teaching development grant, not from research, but from teaching, to get some money. And then I just powered them as much as I could. And then we show again and again to reviewers in the process that actually using the original estimates or a very recent meta-analysis with adjustments to publication bias is a good enough proxy for that. So we have a few ways to overcome both issues with the methods and issues with the power analysis. And the gist of it is we stick to the original and we add whatever is possible. So if we have money and we can power this beyond, then we try to follow Simonson and all the others in order to power more. If we can add additional analysis, then we do that. But the good thing working with students is that if you have a recipe, you just follow that recipe. You do whatever you can based on that recipe. Once the students have completed everything based on the replications, and then we involve early career researchers that take the lead. Some of them love Bayesian analysis, so they, sometimes we want to quantify support for the null hypothesis. So they implement that. Some of them do equivalence testing. Some of them do some very elaborate. Always nice, as long as you, of course, explain that this is exploratory on top of what we pre-registered. But all this is just like a nice bonuses, nice to have. The methods are most of the time explicit in the replications. We do the best that we can in order to follow those and reproduce and do as a comprehensive job as possible in order to expose these methods, because sometimes they're very brief in the original. So basically just showing that everything that they've done in the original works as expected.
Great. So we have one cookbook, one recipe. Bojana, what's the JRP cookbook?
Well, I can sort of say more about the general fault line study, and Lana, please jump in, because I wasn't primarily tasked with statistical analyses, but as Lana mentioned, this study that we were replicating was really new and really like transparent and open science, so it was pretty straightforward to determine. The sample sizes, I think Kai and Thomas, who was the lead statistician, ran simulations to estimate effect sizes. And then what happened is in some countries we had just a tough time collecting enough data for the first study. And that can tie into what Lana mentioned about the political nature of the study. So I know, for example, that also I was involved in data collection in Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in Bosnia, people were just like, oh, this is politics. I'm not going to participate, because they were really wary of the sort of the motives of the researchers and who is conducting the research and everything. So we sort of had to adapt and get creative then in the analyses. And some of the countries were just excluded from the second study because we just didn't have enough power. But then what happened in the statistical analysis for the first study was that the model was so complex with all the nesting and the multi-countries that it just couldn't converge. So they shifted to Bayesian analyses. And I'm not sure that there was a specific cutoff for like whether the study replicates, except like whether the effects are in the same direction. Overall, we got sort of on average the same effect size, somewhere bigger, somewhere smaller than the original study in the US. But I'm not quite sure that there was like a specific cutoff for the effect size prior in the pre-registration. But Lana, please, I'm not an expert on this, so please.
No, you said everything perfect. It wasn't, and basically the only place in which we did not replicate, which the effect was not actually found, was Sudan. But that was the last site included, and probably due to the fact that the data, the data collection was not the same. It was not done in the same way, but rather it was done through an NGO. So it's probable actually that in this case it doesn't signify anything of statistical value, but rather than methodological, something went haywire, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess those two are always so strongly interrelated. It's hard to take them apart. And then Janis, do you have any specific? I mean, you've been also part in many of those studies. So what's your perspective, or what's your experience in deciding on statistical approaches?
Yeah, this has been quite different, and I think it also depends on whether you want to look at the overall effect or whether you want to compare specific effects as well. So if you're doing a cross-cultural comparison, for example, you want to have it high-powered on the country level maybe, but in some cases it might not be important to have it high-powered on an individual level, but mostly look at the overall effect size. So that really differs quite a bit, and this also then differs quite a bit in how you plan on your sample size and power. In most recent projects, I think we always try to look at meta-analysis, and if there were no specific meta-analysis, conduct them ourselves beforehand, which is, I mean, takes a lot of time, but at least there was some approach that we thought might be more helpful, because we know that pilot studies, they typically overestimate effect sizes and have low power, and especially if you want to do it across different countries, and just doing a pilot study in one country doesn't really help. So that's also one thing. I guess statistical wise, in cross-cultural research, you typically use multi-level models because you have different countries and people are nested in countries. So I guess that's at least the default at the moment. And there has been quite a bit of a progress for multi-level models in the past. So it's much easier nowadays to calculate effect sizes than, I don't know, 5 years ago. So at least that's my personal experience of that. What is quite interesting is measurement and variance. So the question whether you actually measure the same thing across countries, especially if you have questionnaires with several items, that becomes important. There are some papers that show that even within the same country, measurement and variance sometimes doesn't even hold. So it's really hard to compare different estimates. So I mean, measurement and variance typically argues whether you have, for example, the same factor loadings, whether the factor loadings have the same size, whether you have the same intercept. And typically it's needed in order to compare means across different samples. But practically, the full measurement and variance does nearly never hold, at least from my own experience, because there's so much additional error in data. But I think it's an important topic to see, for example, what happens if measurement invariance is bad in one country. Do we just exclude that for the final analysis, for example? And that's something that at least needs to be looked at if you want to compare effects. If you don't want to do that, then it might not be important. I mean, there might be some people saying that you can never really compare effects anyway because they culture difference in how you interpret different scales. That's also fine if you take that approach. Then probably comparing effects across different countries also doesn't make much sense. I think what's also interesting in this large-scale project and what's a bit different if you use now about the significant testing, then if you have 10,000 people, everything is basically statistically significant at some point. So it's really important beforehand to decide on what is the smallest effect size of interest, or use Bayesian statistics on the other hand in order to define whether there's a null effect. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, at least I or my colleagues have been struggling with. What is the smallest effect of interest that's still practical important, and how to set that is really hard. Even if you have a meta-analysis, it's hard to decide on that. And I guess there are no good conventions on that. This seems to be still a rather subjective choice, I think. But it's important and also to determine whether you replicate an effect, for example, or whether you found a specific effect. Because I mean, if I have 10,000 people, then the correlation of 0.05 would be statistically significant. But is that practically significant as well? We had some recent projects regarding interventions with regards to corona. So maybe in that sense, such a small effect is important to have that. In others, it might not be really important. So that really depends on the situation and the context.
Thank you. So I think really what we get out of this round is I feel like many approaches are quite similar, but they're more dependent on the context of the study, and like Janis just said, also to think about what is actually a meaningful effect, even if it replicates, even if it's significant. At what point do we say it actually has a big impact? We have 5 minutes left, and before I wrap it up, I would of course like to thank you all for your fantastic contributions. I think this was a really great discussion, and I guess this could go on for 2 more hours. But obviously it would actually it will go on for 2 hours, because we have a second session today with 5 other amazing speakers in the afternoon. I'm very much looking forward to this, and I hope that many of the people who are here today are joining this one as well. It will also be recorded in case you cannot be there. But before I wrap it up, we've been through a lot of topics, but still I would just like to open the floor to anybody who feels any topic that has not been mentioned before, but you think was actually the biggest challenge during your application project and it hasn't been covered. So I just wondered is there anything really major that you think we haven't covered yet and that should still be covered in the future? That very much speaks for the selection of our questions then, I guess.
I might add a small point.
Yeah, please.
We have the time for that. So I think what is really hard and what is sometimes underestimated is if you take the lead in these projects, is the amount of organization that comes into that. And one problem is probably that there is a lack of standardized methods on how to deal with that. I guess if you, like Gilad, if you have lots of experience with that, you just produce the different sheets in order to get everything standardized after some time, and you have some idea and experience how to work on that. And at least the PSA has also some ways on how to centralize everything, but it still is a lot of work. And I mean, you probably send out 2,000 emails to people, and some people won't answer, and you so I mean, distributing roles for the different topics is really helpful, I guess. Having 2 or 3 translation managers, maybe ethics managers, managers for the statistical things and so on, if it's a really big project. And I mean, I guess that's what most of you are already doing anyway. But this is sometimes something that is not really looked at. And I mean, there's some great helpful tools in order to work on that. So for example, just, I mean, not sure whether everybody has that experience before, but if you have 200 co-authors on a paper and you go into these really nice managing softwares for submission, I mean, we all know that they're really great. And you have to add in 200 authors by hand. I mean, that's not something that should take your time. And I mean, just formatting a paper to everyone with their institution on the first page. There's at least one app that does that. It's called Tenzing, in case you want to check it out. But I mean, just these processes, they actually take quite some time from the project. And if it's not really standardized in a certain form, then that's a big problem. But I mean, there are lots of people that try to work on these ways and how to standardize that, and that's really great. And I think just because I'm already talking on quite a bit, just the closing statement, I think open science is one of the most important aspects of what we've seen during the last years as well. And I think that these multi-lab projects or multi-lab applications, I mean, they go hand in hand with open science because you have to communicate with other people and be open about everything. So it makes it really easier to be open and transparent as well, I think. And I also think that in most cases, not in every case, but in most cases, I think these qualify really great for registered report format. And this has different reasons because first of all, you're putting in enormous work in it, so you really want to have it published as well. And I mean, that kind of helps publishing it. And the other thing is that you get additional reviewers of that project to maybe help you on specific methods and so on. So you might even further profit from that input. The downside of it is if you have a project on a certain topic that is not really well researched and you have 200 people on there, you don't really have reviewers left for that topic. And I guess that's something that's important to consider. And I guess it also opens the door for open peer review as a possible tool for that. And I guess all this together, is, at least when it comes to quantitative research, it could also apply to qualitative research, of course. But I guess it's a really great way of doing research. And also, I think we always have to change our mindset a bit on how we perform a study, and that doing it the way that the report format typically needs it is maybe the superior one in certain cases, not in all, but I think in certain cases it's really helpful.
Thank you.
Is it okay if I add a quick note?
Yes, please.
Just very quickly.
Yeah.
I think it's for me at least, it's important to say that if you're an early career researcher and you're thinking, oh my God, this is so complicated, I'll never have a contribution, I'll never be able to finish a project, I'll never be able to publish this, I want to say the PSA and all these models with mass collaborations, multi-country, are amazing. They've done amazing contributions to the field, and all these nature human behavior and AMPPS and perspectives, these are amazing accomplishments. However, much of the work that needs to be done is on a much lower level, singular replications, and this is where you can have a much more meaningful contribution with a much lower risk and a much more smaller involvement that will eventually get to a publication. It wouldn't be nature human behavior and AMPPS, but it will get to the journals. Sometimes these mass collaborations kind of put all of us in the shadow, but there is a lot of room for you to contribute. I think the main contribution in this science reform comes from early career researchers and from students, and there's another possibility of doing different kinds of applications where you can take the lead, be involved, do a project from beginning to end within a very short period of time, and that would lead to an impactful publication that would help you in your career, being an open science researcher that helps promote the field and promote the science reform. So if you want to know more about like the other model, then I'll be very happy to talk to you about that and share some links, and we can pursue that more.
Thank you. I'm really glad that like the final remarks that just came now, and Lana, Bojana, please feel free if there's anything you would like to add now to this as well. I'm really glad that the final sort of comments here are really much revolving back around, and I think we've seen this also further at the beginning of this discussion around changing the culture, really creating communities and groups of people that are enthusiastic about looking into effects that already exist to see, is this research still valid? Is it valid in different countries? How can we improve here? How can we find people from different countries, and also especially in countries that are not that much represented in psychological research globally, to get together with them, also to create bonds between the different researchers and really create those bit tighter knit collaborations and like Gilad said, really communities of people who are doing it and who have like an honest interest in conducting high impact and really good and strong research. Yeah, I think this is really a great takeaway message. On the other hand, of course, we did go through all of the aspects, or most of aspects in replications, multi-country replications, and what challenges can be faced there. I think we saw that many things are being done in a very similar way, but also have to be adjusted to the specific situation, which is also sort of the thinking that we had when we came up with the idea of this panel. So I'm really happy to have learned so much. I'm also really glad that we talked a lot about involving lesser represented countries. And I think really the discussion here and the points that we found here, especially also relating to the differences between getting data from a country and getting collaborators from a country and getting people to lead on these sort of questions from a different perspective, are just highly important. And I really hope that we can work towards having more such projects in the future. Yeah, with this, I would really like to thank everybody. Bojana and Lana, like, sorry, I just went straight through my closing note now. So if you have anything to add, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I would just like to thank you all for being here, for all of your contributions. And I'm really looking forward to putting all of the things that we've learned today in writing, so that they can be helpful to other researchers, future researchers as well. And also, if you have the time, please join us today at 4 o'clock UK time for the second panel discussion on this topic. Thank you very much.